When you make a change in the model, how can you be sure you haven't broken something? Most, as Michael just referenced, most models have some kind of checks in place which are intended to alert you to any structural issues. If a test fails when you make a change, that's usually a sign there's something you need to look into. It could be as simple as running an optimization macro to resolve the issue. Here you can see an example of an audit sheet from one of our models in which I have forced several tests to fail. We would never ship a model looking like this. Our audit tests are unusual, I think, in that we set them up so that they report what an audit fail means in plain English. So that's the kind of the text you can see at the top there. We also split our checks into audit tests and audit warnings. Broadly speaking, an audit test means something is wrong with the model. For example, the balance sheet is not balancing. And a warning means that something is wrong with the project. For example, there is no cash. But even if all of the model's checks are passing, it's another issue altogether to be sure that the change you have made has had the result that you want. Why is it so difficult to make changes in a model? I think one of the reasons why it can be difficult is the way that the models have been designed. For people running operating models, sometimes the financial model is building them forget that they are going to be run by someone whose main job is actually doing something else entirely. So everything needs to be laid out a bit more clearly and in a more user-friendly manner than it does in a model that will only ever be updated in-house at a modeling shop. For the same reason that if you were going to ask me to sign off on somebody's account, I would need an awful lot of hand-holding. So we need to be aware of that. And so first we're going to talk about audit tests and what you can do if they're failing. So I'm a firm believer that if a test is failing in your model, it should be telling you something. Unless we can work out what a test is doing, there is no point in having it. If we're going to ignore it, then it might as well not be there. But before we start worrying, quite a lot of audit fails can be quite easily resolved. Running through this decision tree, I think the first question to ask is it actually a modelling issue or is it more of a commercial warning? For example, a lot of models will have a warning that flags if an overdraft develops. If this is forecast for 20 years in the future and appears in one period and disappears in the next, it may not actually be something to worry about. Something like this, you do want to keep checking on. A persistent overdraft developing in the near future would be cause for concern. But I'd argue you might want to move it to a different category as we do in our templates. Second question to ask is it relevant? For example, some of our models have alternative ways of calculating certain things on the audit sheet and a check against the main model's calculation to see if it gives the same results. If you had amended the main model calculation and were confident it was correct, you might want to remove the test if you weren't sure how to remove the alternative calculation. Or it could be that there are tests about, for example, inputs for something that isn't active, and using an or function, you could tell the model to ignore the failing test whilst the relevant item is switched off. The third question to ask is it material? For example, we generally would be quite concerned if the balance sheet isn't balancing, but if it's only out by £5, this might not be so much of a worry. And you might consider changing the tolerance on the test so that it would flag again if the discrepancy became larger. By removing the audit fails that aren't structural, relevant, or material, you will hopefully left with a rather smaller, perhaps even 0, number of fails. But the ones that are left, you know you need to investigate further or seek external help in understanding. So once you've made your changes and fixed your audit fails, the final thing to do is to be sure that the change is doing what you think it is. So I think the most powerful tool that we have for understanding the impact of modelling changes is what we refer to in-house as cash flow deltas. And these are very straightforward to set up. Before you make the change in the model, you take the worksheet the cash flow is on, and you copy it twice. One copy you paste as values, so it's fixed at the current case, and the other you select the formula cells and change these to be equal to the equivalent cell on the live cash flow, less the equivalent cell on the pasted cash flow. So all should be 0 before you've made any changes. Then you make the changes and analyse the impact of the changes on the cash flow. Afterwards, you can either delete the 2 new sheets or tidy them up and leave them there to be used at a later date. You can always reset the pasted cash flow to the current case by repasting the values that are on the live cash flow. It's really hard to overstate how great these are for checking the impact of changes. Let's say I wanted to add a one-off operating cost of 100k in 2025. I set up my delta, adjust the inputs, and then my pasted cash flow reflects the project before this change and the live reflects it afterwards. Then on my cash flow delta, I would expect to see but the operating costs in the live cash flow are higher by 100k in 2025 only. Some minor changes to working capital and VAT in 2025 and immediately thereafter, a decrease in total tax paid by a much smaller amount, and a change in the shareholder payments made to the shareholders that are pretty much equal and opposite to the above. Your senior debt would normally shouldn't change. In anything that's different from that, it's a flag to check your calculations. For example, if the amount is incorrect, you need to check the inflation. If it's not a one-off cost in 2025, you need to check how the timing and the flags are applying. If the kind of knock-on impacts on the working capital, VAT and tax don't look right, you need to check that that item is captured correctly in those calculations. And if you're not seeing the impact you expect on the financing, then have a look at how it's flowing through the cash cascade. So that is an extremely powerful tool that can give you a great deal of confidence that the changes that you've made are actually reflecting the changes that you wanted to make.